Hey guys, tonight we're sneaking into the kitchens and marketplaces of ancient China, where every step is a gamble between delicious discovery and a culinary dare you might regret forever. The air is thick with steam, spices, and smells so strong they could wake the ancestors, some pleasant, some, let's just say you probably won't survive this dinner party. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love for you to post your location and local time in the comments, always fascinating to see where and when we're hanging out together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle past the massive wooden gates into a city street buzzing with life, lanterns swinging gently in the warm night air. The smell hits you first: soy, vinegar, garlic, and something sour that makes you instinctively wrinkle your nose. This is the world of fermented foods, the backbone of survival in a time without refrigerators, ice machines, or even a decent ice cream shop. People here have been fermenting everything from beans to vegetables for centuries. You pass a stall where a vendor proudly opens a clay jar, releasing the unmistakable scent of fermented soybeans, or duchi, a staple seasoning still used today. It's sharp, salty, and kind of funky. Imagine miso paste but cranked up to 11. Historians still argue whether the earliest fermented bean recipes came from northern farmers storing soybeans over winter or whether they were borrowed from southern tribes who experimented with pickling. Either way, they quickly became beloved for adding umami richness to otherwise bland grain porridges. You watch as a cook stirs a pot of congee and drops in a spoonful, instantly transforming the smell from plain rice to something savory and comforting. But not all ferments are that friendly. You're guided to a stone cellar, where jars of pickled duck eggs sit submerged in briny mud and ash, turning their whites into translucent jelly and their yolks into creamy green orbs. These are century eggs, also called thousand-year-old eggs, though you're relieved to learn they only take a few weeks or months to make. The first bite is a dare. The taste? Strong, ammonia-like, and oddly addictive once you get past the smell. People today still debate whether these were invented by accident when a farmer found duck eggs preserved in alkaline clay, or whether someone intentionally thought, yes, let's eat this slimy masterpiece. Nearby, another vendor cracks open a vat of swan kai, pickled mustard greens. The tangy, sharp smell is so intense it makes your eyes water. This wasn't just about taste. Fermentation kept vegetables safe to eat through long winters and famines. In fact, records from the Han Dynasty describe military rations that included pickled cabbage to prevent scurvy on long campaigns, basically the ancient world's multivitamin. Then there are the true shockers: fermented tofu cubes sitting in reddish brine, so pungent they could double as bug repellent. Known as stinky tofu, these cubes are considered a delicacy in many regions. The process involves letting soy curds rot, yes, literally rot, sometimes for months. You hold your breath and take a tiny bite. Surprisingly, it melts like blue cheese on your tongue, rich and savory. Someone behind you snickers at your reaction. You silently wonder if your breath will scare away spirits tonight. The night market isn't finished showing off. A woman offers you a small cup of rice wine, cloudy and slightly sweet, brewed naturally by yeast in earthen jars. Alcohol, after all, is just another kind of fermentation, one that turns boring grains into something that makes singing ancient poems at midnight seem like an excellent idea. You sip carefully, feeling the warmth spread through you. A little boy tugs at your sleeve, giggling as he points to a jar labeled with a skull mark, an early warning sign. This one, he whispers, contains fermented fish paste so potent it was rumored to knock out unsuspecting travelers. Scholars are still divided over whether this story was a cautionary folk tale or whether someone really did weaponize fish sauce back then. You decide not to find out firsthand. By now, the air feels thicker, heavy with sour and savory scents. It's almost hypnotic, the way each smell layers on the next. You notice a strange comfort in this world of slow transformation, rotting beans becoming dinner, sour cabbage becoming strength for armies, funky eggs turning into a delicacy worth trading for. You can almost hear the laughter of ancient cooks daring one another to try the smelliest new batch. Maybe they're laughing at you, too, as you wipe a tear from your eye and laugh at the absurdity of willingly putting these things in your mouth. You step back into the open street, grateful for the night breeze cutting through the haze. Somewhere a bamboo flute plays softly, a reminder that this was daily life, not a bizarre sideshow. You feel a strange pride that you survived the first round of ancient culinary roulette, and you suspect the menu is about to get even stranger. You keep walking, your stomach still buzzing from that last sip of rice wine, when the night suddenly opens into a courtyard glowing with lantern light. The air is filled with a different kind of aroma now, meaty, rich, and surprisingly decadent. You're stepping into the world of imperial banquets, where the phrase, "eat like a king," takes on a whole new meaning. A massive bronze cauldron bubbles away at the center of the courtyard, steam rolling off in waves that smell of ginger and roasted bones. A chef, dressed in long robes and with a towel slung over his shoulder, drops a slab of meat into the pot with a dramatic splash. Someone whispers to you that this is bear paw stew, a dish so prized by the ancient elite that entire hunting parties were organized just to harvest the paws, considered the most tender and, spiritually nourishing, part of the bear. Historians still argue whether this was purely about taste or a symbolic way to absorb the bear's strength and bravery. Either way, the dish was expensive enough to bankrupt a small village if they tried to serve it. You hesitate, imagining the poor bear giving you a side-eye from the afterlife, but curiosity wins. The chef pulls out a paw, slow-cooked until the skin is gelatinous and the meat tender. The texture is surprisingly soft, more like rich bone marrow than steak. It's the kind of dish you'd never find in a modern restaurant without a PR nightmare. Next comes camel hump, a delicacy mentioned in ancient poetry as being soft, fatty, and perfect for slow braising. You watch as slices are plated, glistening with sauce. The flavor is buttery and rich, almost like pork belly but with a faintly grassy aftertaste. Someone jokes that the camel might have been saving that fat for a desert trip, and now you're eating its emergency stash. You laugh, but secretly hope there's not a sandstorm coming your way. The table is a carnival of meats: pheasant, venison, wild boar. Roasted peacock is brought out, feathers still on for dramatic effect, the head reattached to the golden brown body so it looks like it's just resting after a long day of strutting. The emperor's guests cheer, but you can't help thinking this is the ancient equivalent of serving dinner as a jump scare. On a smaller side table, you spot something you almost mistake for soup dumplings, until the host proudly announces they are monkey brains, once eaten directly from the skull at certain feasts. The idea alone makes your stomach do a little flip. Some scholars claim this practice might be exaggerated in popular imagination, arguing there's little concrete evidence of live monkey dining. Still, the image lingers in your mind as the crowd digs in with gusto. A servant offers you a skewer of roasted grasshoppers, explaining they were a protein-packed snack during times of locust swarms. It's crunchy, salty, and not nearly as weird as you expected, sort of like eating a popcorn kernel with legs. You even consider asking for another, just to prove you're officially part of this very strange dinner club. There's laughter around the table as musicians strike up a lively tune with drums and flutes. The feast isn't just about eating, it's a power display. Each dish screams status: rare, exotic, dangerous to obtain. Eating something like tiger meat was believed to make one fearless, though you suspect the real fear came from the hunters who had to chase a tiger with nothing but spears. A poet at the table recites a verse comparing a perfect banquet to the balance of yin and yang, rich meats balanced by cooling herbs, fried dishes paired with pickled sides. You sip some herbal tea to wash it all down, feeling oddly sophisticated despite having just gnawed on camel hump. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a practical thought surfaces: this level of meat consumption wasn't for everyone. The average farmer was lucky to see pork once a year during festivals. This contrast makes you glance around at the silks, the gold dishes, the way servants refill cups before they're even empty. You can almost hear the resentment brewing outside the palace walls. As the final dish is brought out, a whole roasted swan surrounded by carved radish flowers, you lean back and watch everyone clap in delight. For a brief moment, you forget that most of these foods were forbidden to anyone outside the court. The banquet feels like a theater show, where every bite is another act in a performance about wealth, power, and the right to indulge. When the feast winds down, you step outside into the cooler night air. Your head feels lighter, maybe from the wine, maybe from the dizzying variety of creatures you just consumed. Somewhere a dog barks, and you can't help wondering if he's next on the menu. After all, ancient records mention dog meat as a common dish. You decide not to stick around and find out, hurrying onward before the next course chooses you. You walk deeper into the city, past the clanging of kitchen cauldrons and the last echoes of banquet laughter, until the air shifts again, sweeter this time, tinged with the perfume of fruit stalls. Your path is lined with baskets brimming with peaches, plums, and melons that look like they were painted by an artist obsessed with perfect symmetry. You lean closer, inhaling their honeyed scent, but a merchant quickly waves his hands, warning you not to touch. Some of these fruits, he explains, are not for the likes of ordinary travelers. Peaches are especially prized, their golden flesh considered a symbol of immortality. Ancient Chinese legends speak of the Queen Mother of the West, Shi Huangmu, who grew peaches that ripened only once every 3,000 years and granted eternal life to those lucky enough to taste them. Historians still argue whether this myth inspired emperors to hoard certain varieties of peaches for their courts, keeping them forbidden to commoners. You imagine a farmer sneaking just one bite of such a peach, glancing over his shoulder as if heaven itself might strike him down. Not all fruits were so divine. Some were dangerous. You pause at a basket of wild nightshades, shiny and inviting but potentially poisonous if eaten raw. The vendor warns that they must be boiled several times before they are safe. Even then, a few unlucky souls might find their tongues tingling and hearts racing. Ancient medical texts describe them as both a cure for certain fevers and a cause of nightmarish visions. You picture some poor villager accidentally tripping on nightshade stew while just trying to get dinner on the table. Nearby, a healer is grinding seeds with a stone mortar, explaining that they are from the apricot tree. He smiles knowingly, mentioning that in small amounts, these kernels were used as medicine, but in large doses, they could be deadly. Today we know they contain cyanogenic compounds that release cyanide. The idea that medicine and poison can be the same thing depending on the dose makes you step back cautiously, clutching your stomach as though that might save you. At another stall, strange-looking gourds hang like lanterns, hollowed and filled with an herbal brew said to cleanse the body and purge bad spirits. The liquid is bitter enough to make your face twist, but you're told it was part of seasonal rituals meant to reset the balance between yin and yang. Some scholars think these rituals were as much about community bonding as actual health, because nothing unites people quite like collectively suffering through a horrible tasting drink and pretending it's good for you. A young girl skips past, clutching a lotus root slice like a snack chip, crunching happily. The root is crisp, refreshing, and slightly sweet, considered both food and medicine. But then she points to another plant, a cluster of deadly-looking aconite flowers, and whispers that her grandmother says they were once boiled down into a tonic for warriors to give them courage. Historians debate whether this was literal courage or just numbness from the toxins dulling their fear. Either way, you quietly decide you don't need to be that brave. Then comes the moment that makes your jaw drop. A wizened old man tells you in a hushed tone about a delicacy once reserved for nobles, fruits steeped in wine mixed with gold flakes. Consuming gold was believed to purify the body and even lengthen life. Modern science would strongly advise against this practice, but you can't help imagining the glittery smile you'd have after such a snack. Your senses are overloaded now, sweet, bitter, dangerous, sacred. It's a reminder that food here is never just food. Every bite carries meaning, luck, longevity, health, or punishment. You spot a group of monks collecting wild herbs by moonlight, and your guide tells you they are searching for lingzhi mushrooms, thought to be a key to immortality. The mushrooms look gnarled and strange, like something out of a fantasy novel. You wonder if anyone ever actually lived longer because of them, or if it was just an ancient marketing scheme by clever herbalists. As you step away from the fruit stalls, the air turns heavier, carrying the scent of crushed leaves and damp soil. You glance back one last time, half expecting one of those immortal peaches to glow in the moonlight. Instead, you just see the vendor carefully locking up his wares, as though protecting not just fruit, but secrets. The thought follows you as you walk away: in this world, what you eat can make you stronger, wiser, or end your story entirely. The path grows narrower now, guiding you toward a quieter part of the city where the crowds have thinned and the air carries a strange, creamy smell you can't quite place. A row of low wooden buildings stands here, their doors closed, yet you hear faint murmurs and the clatter of ceramic bowls from within. This is where you stumble across one of the most controversial whispers in all of ancient Chinese cuisine, something so bizarre it sounds more like a rumor than a recipe. Inside one of the dimly lit houses, you see a woman stirring a pot over a low fire, the contents thick and white. At first, you think it's just ordinary cow's milk being heated, except cows weren't as widely milked in ancient China as they were in the West. Your guide leans in close and whispers, "This could be human milk cheese, a curious and unsettling practice rumored to exist in certain dynasties." Historians still argue whether this was ever common or if it's just a salacious tale repeated by travelers to shock their audiences back home. Some texts, however, hint at its use in early medicinal recipes, believed to strengthen infants or even revitalize weakened elders. You picture court physicians debating dosage like modern pharmacists: "Yes, Your Majesty, 2 spoonfuls before bed should restore your vitality." The idea alone is enough to make you glance around nervously. You watch as the woman pours the thickened liquid into bamboo molds, letting it set like tofu. When she slices off a piece for you to try, you hesitate so long she chuckles softly and pops it in your mouth herself. The taste is surprisingly mild, sweet, nutty, almost like ricotta. But the psychological hurdle is real. You feel your eyebrows shooting up toward your hairline as your brain tries to process what just happened. Across the room, a man is mixing something even stranger: powdered donkey hide gelatin, called a jiao, slowly melting it into a medicinal broth. This gelatin, made by boiling donkey skin, was prized for centuries as a tonic to improve blood circulation and female fertility. Even today, it's still sold in traditional medicine shops. You hold the warm cup in your hands, the steam smelling faintly of herbs and leather. Taking a sip, you taste something earthy, almost metallic, like drinking the essence of a barn. On a shelf nearby sit small clay jars labeled with faded ink symbols. One, you're told, contains purple milk, which was milk infused with ground herbs and even animal bile to create a vivid, medicinal tonic. Some scholars believe these concoctions were early experiments in functional foods, eating not just to fill your stomach but to actively manipulate your health, mood, even destiny. Suddenly, there's a loud hiss from the next room. You peek in to find a giant clay pot being carefully uncovered. Inside is a pale, jelly-like substance, the infamous bird's nest soup, made from the hardened saliva of cave swallows. These nests were so valuable that entire expeditions were launched to climb dangerous cliffs and collect them. You watch as a cook ladles the translucent strands into a bowl, explaining that it was believed to beautify the skin and prolong youth. You take a spoonful and notice its delicate, slippery texture, more of a feeling than a flavor. It's impossible not to wonder how anyone first thought these things up. Who decided to take bird spit, boil it, and call it dinner? You imagine some ancient foodie bragging, "You just haven't developed the palate for it yet," while everyone else quietly questions his sanity. Your mind keeps circling back to the human milk cheese. You can't shake the thought that food here blurs every line between nutrition, medicine, and taboo. It wasn't about normal or weird, it was about what worked, what healed, and what connected humans to nature in every possible way. When you finally step back out into the cool night, the stars seem brighter, almost mocking your hesitation. You realize that in this world, nothing is truly off the table, literally. Every ingredient is fair game if it promises health, vitality, or the favor of the heavens. You walk on with a mixture of awe and mild queasiness, your stomach carrying a secret most people will never dare to imagine. The road widens again, leading you toward a lively cluster of taverns glowing with lantern light, their doors flung open to let the warm smell of brewing mash drift out into the night. This part of the city hums with laughter and clinking cups, and you suddenly realize that we've barely scratched the surface of the liquid experiments that ancient China had to offer. Here, the line between food and potion, refreshment and remedy, is delightfully blurred. A server waves you over to a low wooden table and sets down a ceramic jug painted with dancing deer. Inside is deer antler wine, one of the most famous tonic drinks in Chinese history. The antlers are sliced into pieces, soaked in grain alcohol, and aged until the liquid is amber and faintly bitter. You take a cautious sip. It tastes earthy, slightly musky, and leaves a warming trail down your throat. People believe this wine could strengthen bones, increase vitality, and maybe even spark a little extra romance on a cold night. Historians still argue whether this was science or just wishful thinking, but either way, it worked well enough to keep the tradition alive for centuries. Next comes something even wilder, snake wine. A man brings out a tall glass jar where a coiled serpent floats menacingly in liquid. You half expect it to spring back to life. He assures you the snake was chosen for its potency and carefully steeped until its essence fused with the alcohol. The first sip is sharp, herbal, and a little unsettling, as though the drink itself might bite back. Your guide chuckles and reminds you that such drinks were believed to improve circulation and ward off illness, though you silently suspect they just made drinkers feel brave enough to say so. At the next table, an older woman is brewing a medicinal tea made from chrysanthemum blossoms and dried wolfberries. The scent is floral and soothing, a welcome contrast to the reptilian aftertaste in your mouth. She insists that this tea clears heat from the body and brightens the eyes. You picture emperors sipping it late into the night while poring over scrolls, trying to look both wise and well hydrated. But not all brews are so elegant. In a darker corner, you find jars of rice mash fermenting with something far stranger, whole scorpions. The tavern keeper grins mischievously as he pours you a small cup. The drink is fiery and leaves a tingling sensation on your tongue, almost like pepper. Some say this kind of brew was taken as a cure for chronic pain or even as a kind of dare among soldiers. Historians debate whether it actually helped or simply distracted people with the idea that they were drinking poison like fearless warriors. Another pot catches your eye, this one bubbling gently. It turns out to be herbal chicken soup spiked with ginseng wine. The mixture smells rich and almost medicinal. You take a sip and feel a rush of warmth in your chest. Ginseng was so prized it was sometimes worth its weight in silver, and entire forests were stripped to meet the demand. You imagine treasure hunters risking their lives to dig up roots that looked vaguely like tiny human figures, all for a shot at better health and longer life. Then, just when you think you've seen it all, someone brings out 5 animal broth, a dish recorded in medical texts that combined bones and organs from 5 different creatures, simmered together as a cure-all. The smell is intense, meaty, smoky, a little gamey. You try a spoonful and find it surprisingly good, like the richest bone broth you've ever had. Still, you can't help joking to yourself that this is the ancient version of mixing every soda at the fountain and calling it a recipe. Around you, the tavern fills with chatter and music, drums thumping softly in the background. A group of scholars debate loudly about whether wine makes the mind sharper or duller. Someone argues that alcohol helps unlock the poet's heart, while another counters that too much will have you writing embarrassing love poems you regret in the morning. You grin at the thought, seems some debates never change. As you step back out into the cool air, the sounds of the tavern fade but the warmth lingers in your chest. You've just drunk a history lesson, a little medicine, a little magic, and a lot of courage poured into a cup. Somewhere ahead, the night promises even stranger recipes, and you realize you might just be tipsy enough to try them all. The night grows quieter as you leave the tavern behind, the laughter and clinking cups fading until all that's left is the faint hiss of your own breath in the cool air. Your head feels warm, your steps a little slower, and then you notice a faint glow ahead, a single building with heavy curtains drawn over its windows. This is no ordinary kitchen. You're about to step into the Emperor's private world, the secretive aphrodisiac kitchen, where dishes were prepared not just to feed hunger, but to ignite desire, boost energy, and, if the records are to be believed, keep the dynasty alive. Inside, the room is quiet, almost sacred, filled with the smell of spices that tickle your nose. Cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and something faintly sweet you can't quite name. At the far end of the room, a cook in embroidered robes stirs a small copper pot with absolute focus. The dish is an herbal jelly infused with ginseng, deer antler shavings, and a rare root said to increase vitality. You catch the cook glancing at you with an amused smile, as if to say, this is definitely not just dessert. Historians still argue whether these recipes actually worked or whether they were simply placebos served with a side of superstition. But the emperors clearly believed in them. Many records mention entire gardens devoted to growing yang-enhancing plants like dodder seeds and goji berries. Some texts even describe imperial pharmacists preparing aphrodisiac pills shaped like little gold dragons, to be taken before a visit to the royal harem. You try not to picture the emperor tossing one back like a vitamin gummy. On a nearby table lies something more intimidating, tiger bone wine, dark and resinous. Tigers were thought to embody raw power, and consuming their bones was believed to transfer that ferocity to the drinker. You run your finger along the rim of the bowl, feeling the faint heat radiating from the liquid, before taking the tiniest sip. It tastes smoky, slightly bitter, and leaves a strange prickling sensation along your tongue. You half expect to grow claws on the spot. Not all of these recipes were so animal-based. Some used pungent spices like Sichuan peppercorns, whose numbing heat was believed to awaken the senses. The cook demonstrates by handing you a small piece of meat rubbed with a peppercorn paste. As you chew, your lips tingle and your tongue goes half numb, and for a moment you can't tell whether you should laugh or panic. It clears the pathways, the cook says serenely, as though that explains everything. A covered dish is brought out next, revealed to hold a pair of glossy black eggs marinated in wine and herbs. These, you're told, were sometimes served to favored concubines before ceremonial evenings. The symbolism of eggs, fertility, renewal, wasn't lost on anyone. You crack one open and taste the rich, spiced yolk, wondering how many imperial children might owe their existence to meals like this. Then there's honey, considered both a luxury and a potent tonic. Honeyed dates, honey-sweetened wines, even honey mixed with crushed walnuts for a midnight snack, all were thought to replenish, jing, the body's vital essence. You try a spoonful straight from the pot, the sweetness coating your mouth and leaving you a little lightheaded. In one corner of the room, an assistant is grinding a powder made from seahorse tails. The sight makes you pause. Seahorses look so delicate, yet here they were transformed into medicine for strength and virility. Some scholars argue that such recipes were as much psychological as physical. The very act of consuming something rare or powerful might have boosted confidence enough to do the rest. The atmosphere grows warmer, the air heavy with spices and promise. You realize this kitchen wasn't just a place to cook, it was a kind of alchemy lab, blending food, medicine, and mythology into something that shaped the fate of dynasties. Imagine the pressure, literally, to get these recipes right. If an emperor's energy waned, so did his ability to produce heirs, and that meant the future of the entire empire could rest on the next bowl of soup. You step outside, the cool night air rushing against your flushed face. Somewhere in the palace, an emperor is probably sitting down to a meal designed to keep history moving forward. And as you walk on, you wonder if the next strange dish you encounter will be meant to nourish your body, or challenge your courage. The road bends toward the coast, and suddenly the air changes, salter, fresher, with a faint briny tang that makes you think of waves crashing against distant rocks. You've arrived at the ancient seaside markets, where the bounty of the ocean is laid out in baskets and tubs, some of it so alien-looking you wonder if you've accidentally stepped onto another planet. The moon glints off the wet shells and scales, making everything gleam like treasure. Right away, your attention is caught by a giant ceramic vat full of wiggling shapes. At first, you think they're worms until you lean closer and realize they're live shrimp, leaping and splashing as vendors scoop them out with nets. The shrimp are tossed directly into boiling pots, served seconds later while still curling from the heat. You pop one in your mouth, after a moment of moral hesitation, and taste the freshest, sweetest bite of the night, the brine of the sea still clinging to it. Then comes the sea cucumber. It looks, well, like something you might hesitate to pick up on a beach, let alone eat. But here, they're considered a luxury, prized for their slippery, gelatinous texture and supposed health benefits. The vendor slices one open and shows you its soft, almost transparent flesh before tossing it into a broth rich with ginger and rice wine. The texture is somewhere between chewy and silky, definitely an acquired taste. Historians still argue whether sea cucumber became popular first for its flavor or its reputation as a tonic for longevity. A little further down, you find jellyfish hanging like translucent ribbons from wooden racks, drying in the salty air. The vendor chops some into strips, tosses them with vinegar and sesame oil, and hands you a portion. The crunch is oddly satisfying, like biting into a very thin noodle that bites back. It's light, refreshing, and nothing like you expected. Next to the jellyfish stand is a tank full of turtles, their heads slowly peeking out of their shells. Turtle soup was considered a dish of refinement, thought to strengthen the body and calm the spirit. You watch as a chef expertly prepares one, simmering it with medicinal herbs until the broth turns a deep, savory brown. When you sip it, it's rich and slightly sweet, with a depth that makes you think of slow winter nights by the fire. A fisherman waves you over to a barrel covered with a bamboo lid. When he removes it, the smell hits first, fermented fish sauce, sharp enough to make your eyes water. He grins proudly, telling you this was a trade item so valuable that wars were fought over access to coastal fisheries. This sauce wasn't just a condiment, it was an economic power move. You dip a finger and taste a single drop, it's salty, funky, and instantly transforms the memory of plain rice into something complex. Farther down, you find oysters shucked fresh and handed to you still dripping. They taste of the tide itself, slippery and briny. In ancient times, they were sometimes eaten raw, other times baked with spices. You can't help but smirk, thinking that modern foodies aren't nearly as adventurous as they think, they're just rediscovering what coastal cooks were doing 1,000 years ago. Then you spot something that makes you stop in your tracks, a small stand offering sea snakes, their long bodies coiled neatly on trays. The vendor explains they can be stewed or grilled, and are said to strengthen the body and drive out wind, an old term for joint pain. You decide not to ask too many questions about that one and simply watch as someone else bravely samples a bite. What really catches your imagination is how much effort went into hauling all this from the sea to the table. Divers risking their lives for shellfish, fishermen braving storms for crabs, traders hauling barrels of dried kelp inland to feed armies and emperors alike. The ocean wasn't just food, it was a lifeline, a source of wealth, and occasionally a source of danger. As you leave the market, your feet crunch on seashells scattered across the ground. The night is quiet except for the distant sound of waves and the calls of seabirds. You can almost feel the salt on your skin and the faint rocking of a boat under your feet, as though the ocean itself is reminding you that this feast comes with a price, the courage to face its depths and the skill to harvest its hidden treasures. You leave the salty markets behind and wander back inland, the air growing cooler and stiller as the sounds of crashing waves fade into silence. The streets here feel heavier somehow, as though you've stepped into a neighborhood where the wrong move could get you into trouble. Your guide slows his pace and leans closer, lowering his voice. This is where we talk about the foods you weren't even allowed to think about eating unless you were royalty, or unless you wanted to risk a very public punishment. At the center of the district stands a palace gate, its roof tiled with glazed green dragons. Through the bars you can see carts loaded with sacks of millet and wheat, trays of glistening fruits, and casks of wine. You might assume this is just another food delivery, but these ingredients are no ordinary supplies. They are tribute foods, gifts sent from far corners of the empire to the emperor himself, items forbidden to be eaten by common folk under pain of death. Historians still argue how strictly these rules were enforced, but there are chilling records describing what happened if someone was caught sneaking a royal delicacy. The punishments could range from public shaming to execution, depending on the dynasty. You imagine some poor farmer plucking a single forbidden lychee from an orchard, only to find himself standing before an imperial magistrate the next day. Lychees, in fact, were one of the most famous of these forbidden treats. The Tang dynasty's Emperor Xuanzong is said to have adored them so much that an entire courier system was set up to deliver fresh lychees from southern China to the northern capital, hundreds of miles away, in a single day. The fruit would spoil if delayed, so horses galloped day and night to ensure that the emperor's favorite concubine could enjoy them perfectly ripe. You stare at the little red fruits and think about the power of craving, how many lives and resources were spent just to satisfy a single taste. Another example. Salt. It seems so ordinary now, sitting quietly in your kitchen, but in ancient China, salt was a tightly controlled monopoly. Certain regions were forbidden to produce it on their own, and smugglers risked everything to move contraband salt across provincial borders. The emperor's court used salt taxes to fund armies, palaces, and infrastructure. You run your tongue over your lips and realize just how strange it is that a pinch of salt once represented political rebellion. In another corner of the courtyard, you spot a rack of spices, cinnamon, pepper, star anise, shimmering like treasure under the lantern light. These were luxury imports, and ordinary people might never taste them in their lifetime. Eating spiced food without permission could be seen as flaunting wealth you didn't have. You imagine sneaking a single peppercorn into your bowl of rice at home and feeling like you were committing the culinary equivalent of high treason. The cooks bustle about inside the palace kitchen, preparing dishes with ingredients that peasants could only dream of: tender lamb ribs, rare fruits like longan and jujube, delicate fish steamed in lotus leaves. Each dish is plated on ornate bronze or porcelain vessels, decorated with dragons and phoenixes, reminders that this food is as much about divine right as about dinner. The exclusivity wasn't just about greed, it was about symbolism. Certain foods were believed to carry heavenly energy, linking the emperor to cosmic order. If a commoner ate them, it might disrupt the balance or be seen as challenging the emperor's mandate to rule. Whether or not people truly believed this, it certainly kept the best ingredients flowing to the palace. You walk past the kitchens and spot a group of guards laughing softly while sharing a forbidden sip of the emperor's wine. The thrill is written all over their faces. You can almost feel their hearts pounding at the risk of being caught. Maybe that was part of the appeal: danger makes every flavor sharper. As you step back into the open street, you realize how powerful food can be, not just as nourishment, but as a marker of class, privilege, and danger. A piece of fruit could be enough to divide emperor from peasant, loyalty from rebellion, life from death. You clutch your stomach as if to remind yourself that tonight, you're just a visitor. The palace gates close behind you with a deep, echoing thud, and you walk on with a strange mix of relief and longing, wondering what other forbidden tastes still lie ahead. The streets grow quieter now, almost too quiet, as though the whole city is holding its breath. A mist curls along the ground, making your footsteps sound muffled. Ahead, you see a low, smoky fire and a circle of figures crouched around it. You're about to witness something that most people of the empire never even dared speak about: ritual offerings where food wasn't meant to be eaten at all, at least not by humans. You sit cross-legged near the edge of the circle as priests in flowing robes arrange bowls of rice, pork, and wine on a low wooden altar. The air smells of incense and roasted meat, and somewhere off to the side, a musician plucks a mournful note on a zither. You suddenly feel as though you've stepped into a dream. The offerings are not for the living but for ancestors, spirits, and sometimes for dangerous gods who needed to be kept happy. The lead priest carefully pours rice wine into a carved bronze vessel, then tilts it so that the liquid spills directly onto the ground. The hiss of wine hitting earth feels strangely dramatic. Historians still argue whether the spirits were believed to physically consume these offerings or simply take their essence. Either way, nobody would dare eat the leftovers afterward. That would be asking for bad luck, illness, or worse. Then comes the strangest moment: a live animal is brought forward, sometimes a piglet, sometimes a rooster. You watch with wide eyes as it's gently placed before the altar. There's no violence tonight, just a symbolic offering, but in older times, these sacrifices could be very real. The meat would then be cooked and shared among priests, but never among uninvited guests. The idea was that by feeding the gods first, you secured their favor for the year ahead. Beside you, a bowl of sticky rice is set down, topped with what looks like a perfect red date. The sweet smell makes your stomach grumble, but you know this one isn't for you. These ritual cakes were often buried in the ground or floated down rivers as gifts to wandering spirits. You imagine tiny ghostly hands reaching up from the soil to take the food, and you suddenly don't feel so hungry. The priest chants softly, reciting prayers that have been used for centuries. The words are rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You feel yourself swaying slightly, lulled by the sound. Then a sudden crack, firecrackers, snaps you awake. The loud pops are meant to scare away hungry demons who might crash the ritual feast. You can't help but smile. Even in the afterlife, it seems, there's always someone trying to steal the snacks. Nearby, you notice a curious object, a paper effigy of a roast duck. Instead of being eaten, it will be burned so the smoke can deliver it to ancestors in the spirit realm. You watch as the paper turns to ash, glowing briefly before vanishing into the night sky. It's oddly beautiful, and slightly heartbreaking, to think of food being transformed into smoke just so someone on the other side might enjoy it. And not all offerings were solemn. During festivals, people would leave bowls of sweets or dumplings at crossroads to appease wandering ghosts. Children were warned not to touch these spirit snacks, lest they invite bad luck home. You picture a mischievous kid sneaking one anyway and then spending the night convinced every creak in the house is a ghost coming to collect payment. You glance around the circle one last time, the firelight dancing on everyone's faces. The smell of incense clings to your clothes, and for a moment, the night feels heavier, almost sacred. You realize that forbidden foods weren't always forbidden because of politics or luxury, sometimes they were off limits because they belonged to someone else entirely, someone you couldn't even see. When the final chants fade and the offerings are cleared away, the night air feels almost too empty, like something has been taken from it. You step away quietly, your shoes crunching on the ashes, and follow the road onward. The mist seems to part just for you, as though the spirits have had their fill and are letting you pass safely, for now. The road ahead feels lighter after leaving the ritual grounds, but there's a strange, metallic scent in the air now, like iron, sharp and almost sour. You follow it until you see a small camp set up at the edge of a battlefield long abandoned. This is where the warriors once gathered, and tonight, you're stepping into the world of battlefield rations and warlord feasts. Here, food wasn't just about staying alive, it was about survival, morale, and sometimes intimidation. A grizzled old soldier squats by a fire, stirring a bubbling pot. You crouch down beside him and peer inside. The broth is dark and steaming, with chunks of meat bobbing like driftwood. He tells you this is a simple millet porridge, easy to make, easy to carry, and the backbone of military diets for centuries. Soldiers could march for days on this alone. You take a sip, and it's plain but comforting, the kind of food that warms you from the inside out. But not all battlefield meals were so tame. The soldier gestures to a second pot, where the smell is stronger, gamier. This one contains horse meat, a last resort dish eaten only when supplies ran out. You hesitate for a moment, then taste a small piece. It's surprisingly tender, but knowing where it came from makes you glance uneasily at the nearby tethered horses. Historians still argue whether eating horse was a practical choice or a desperate one, since horses were so valuable for war. Nearby, a row of jars catches your attention. The soldier pries one open to reveal a stash of fermented bean curd, salty, pungent, and perfect for adding flavor to otherwise bland rations. You spread a little on your millet cake and take a bite. It's strong enough to make your eyes water, but you can see how it would have been a morale booster on a cold night. Then comes something even stranger, dried blood cakes. Made from animal blood mixed with grain, these cakes were packed with protein and easy to transport. They look like dark bricks, and when roasted over the fire, they give off a smell that's earthy and almost metallic. You take a cautious bite, and the taste is rich, almost like liver. It's the kind of food that makes sense only when you're far from home and desperate for strength. Some warlords, however, ate very differently. When they weren't on the march, they hosted lavish banquets in their war camps, meant to intimidate rivals and inspire loyalty. You can almost hear the clatter of bronze goblets as roasted boar, whole fish, and piles of dumplings are carried to the table. Imagine sitting there after weeks of dry rations, suddenly faced with a feast fit for a king. The psychological effect must have been enormous. Your guide points to a dark stain on a nearby stone. Here, he says, warriors once mixed wine with their own blood before drinking it as a vow of brotherhood. The idea makes you shiver. Sharing a meal was one thing, but sharing blood turned it into a sacred bond. Food and loyalty were tied together so tightly that breaking bread, or spilling wine, became a political act. Then there's the matter of captured food. Victorious armies often feasted on the supplies of their enemies. Sometimes that meant delicacies they had never tasted before. Other times, it meant quickly eating whatever they could find before it spoiled. You picture a group of soldiers celebrating with their enemies' wine while still wearing dusty armor, laughing like they'd stolen a piece of heaven. The fire burns low as the soldier hands you a small pouch filled with dried jerky and pickled vegetables, perfect for the road. You sling it over your shoulder and look back at the quiet camp. War food wasn't glamorous, but it kept empires standing and soldiers marching. It also blurred the line between necessity and ritual, turning meals into moments of courage, despair, and sometimes raw determination. As you step back into the night, you hear a distant sound, maybe thunder, maybe drums, and for a moment, you imagine an army marching past, their packs full of millet cakes and jars of bean paste, heading toward another battle where food might be the difference between victory and defeat. The night road winds past the abandoned war camp until the air suddenly feels warmer, almost steamy. You follow the scent of sizzling oil and sweet spices until you find yourself standing at the edge of a bustling kitchen courtyard. This isn't a palace kitchen, though, it's the secretive domain of the imperial court's medical chefs, where food was prepared not just to please the palate but to heal the body and sharpen the mind. You duck under the doorway and step inside. The kitchen is alive with motion, pots simmering, knives flashing, pestles grinding herbs into fine powders. The cooks wear simple robes, but their hands move with the precision of surgeons. They're making what was once the emperor's prescription dinner, meals designed by royal physicians to rebalance the qi and correct any signs of illness before they became dangerous. At the first station, a chef stirs a clay pot of chicken soup, not just any chicken soup but one infused with ginseng, angelica root, and goji berries. The smell is earthy and slightly sweet, like medicine disguised as comfort food. You taste a spoonful, and it warms your chest almost instantly. Historians still argue whether these recipes were more medicinal or symbolic, but the careful balance of ingredients shows just how seriously they took the idea of food as medicine. On a nearby table lies something stranger, a paste of crushed pearls, honey, and chrysanthemum petals. The chef explains that this mixture was sometimes added to desserts as a beauty tonic, meant to keep the emperor's complexion youthful. You raise an eyebrow, thinking of modern influencers touting collagen powders, and can't help but laugh. Clearly, some wellness trends are timeless. Farther along, a pot of black bone chicken simmers in a dark broth. This rare chicken breed, with its dark skin and bones, was considered a potent tonic, especially for restoring strength after illness. You take a cautious bite and find the flavor richer than ordinary chicken, almost like game meat. It feels oddly energizing, as if the dish really is doing something more than just filling your stomach. In the corner, a cook pounds deer antler into powder, which will be mixed into a warming winter stew. The smell is sharp, almost medicinal, and you wonder what it must have felt like to sip that broth on a cold night, knowing it was meant to keep the imperial bloodline healthy. Some scholars debate whether these dishes were genuinely effective or just elaborate placebo rituals, but it's clear they were taken seriously enough to record in detailed scrolls that still survive. A row of jars catches your attention, fermented soybean pastes and vinegars, labeled with careful brushstrokes. Fermented foods were valued for aiding digestion and strengthening the spleen, which in traditional Chinese medicine was key to overall health. You taste a dab of the paste on your tongue, it's salty, tangy, and surprisingly addictive. You imagine the emperor dipping steamed greens into it and feeling just a little bit healthier with every bite. There's even a dessert table here, though it's far from decadent. Sweet lotus seed soup, red bean cakes, and almond jelly are prepared with exacting precision to avoid overheating the body. You sample one of the bean cakes, its sweetness just barely enough to count as dessert, and think how different it is from the sugary overloads of modern life. And then there's the strangest dish of all, a porridge made with silkworm chrysalis powder. Yes, you heard that right. Silkworms. It was believed to help with skin ailments and improve circulation. You take a deep breath, then a tiny spoonful. It's nutty, almost like roasted soy, and you find yourself grudgingly impressed. Who knew luxury could taste so earthy? When you finally step back out into the night, you feel oddly refreshed, as if just breathing in the kitchen air gave you a health boost. The stars seem brighter, and your footsteps feel lighter. You realize that for the emperor, every meal was not just about staying full, it was a prescription for living longer, ruling stronger, and looking good doing it. You head down the path once more, your stomach warm and your curiosity sharper than ever, wondering what other forbidden tastes still lie ahead. You leave the medicinal kitchens behind, the warmth still lingering in your chest, and the road ahead feels darker now, wilder, even. Soon, the path narrows, and you find yourself walking into a dense bamboo grove. The air smells damp, earthy, and faintly sweet, as though something is fermenting nearby. You push through the tall stalks and stumble upon a clearing filled with barrels, jars, and curious-looking pits covered with wooden lids. Welcome to the hidden world of ancient fermentation, where forbidden foods were not just rare, but alive. The first jar you pass is bubbling softly, its contents hissing like a sleeping dragon. A brewer lifts the lid and lets you peek inside. It's soybeans, left to ferment until they turn into a dark, salty paste, what we'd recognize today as the ancestor of soy sauce. The smell is sharp, almost too strong, but the brewer grins and tells you this was liquid gold in its time. Historians still argue whether it was discovered by accident or through careful experimentation, but either way, once people tasted it, they never went back to plain boiled grains. Nearby, a group of workers stirs a massive crock of pickled mustard greens. The tangy, sour smell hits you right in the sinuses, and you can't help but sneeze. They laugh and offer you a bite. The crunch is satisfying, the flavor bright and sharp, and you suddenly understand why soldiers and farmers would fight over a single jar of this stuff. It kept through harsh winters and turned bland rice into something you actually looked forward to eating. Then comes the wine, if you can even call it wine. Clay jars line the ground, their mouths sealed with mud. When one is cracked open, a sweet, yeasty smell fills the air. The brewer pours you a ladle of cloudy rice wine, warm from natural fermentation. You take a cautious sip and nearly cough as the burn hits your throat. The taste is somewhere between sake and cider, with a kick strong enough to make you take a step back. No wonder this drink was sometimes restricted to nobles, it had the power to make a festival lively or a rebellion even livelier. But fermentation wasn't just about pleasure. Some foods crossed the line into almost dangerous territory. You're shown a jar of stinky tofu, yes, the name is exactly what it sounds like. The smell is so pungent you're tempted to hold your breath, but the vendor insists you try it. You take a tiny bite and are surprised by the rich, creamy flavor beneath the funk. You can't decide if you love it or hate it, but you definitely can't forget it. In another corner, a heavy stone lid is lifted to reveal preserved eggs, their whites turn translucent and black, the yolks dark green and creamy. They look like something from another planet, but they were considered delicacies. You pop one into your mouth, and the flavor is complex, earthy, slightly sulfurous, almost cheesy. It's the kind of taste that feels like a secret, like something you're not supposed to be eating in the middle of the night. Your guide explains that fermentation wasn't just culinary, it was magical. Ancient texts claim that properly fermented foods could balance the body's energies, lengthen life, and even ward off evil spirits. Some scholars debate whether these beliefs were spiritual or practical, since fermentation did make food safer and more nutritious. Still, you can imagine villagers whispering about the living jars in the cellar, half afraid of what they might be nurturing inside. And of course, there were failures. Your guide points to a rotted barrel pushed off to the side. Too much moisture, the wrong temperature, or a careless hand could turn a prized jar of pickles into poison. Some emperors had official taster rolls just to make sure their fermented foods wouldn't end in tragedy. You shiver at the thought of being the unlucky tester for a batch gone wrong. As you step away from the clearing, you notice how quiet the grove is, as though even the night is waiting for the jars to keep doing their slow, invisible work. Fermentation was patience turned into flavor, and flavor turned into power. You leave with the taste of sour wine on your tongue and the strange feeling that you've just peeked into one of humanity's oldest secrets, how to make food last, even if it had to smell like a dare to eat. The path winds back toward the city, but now you notice the lanterns ahead are smaller, the alleys narrower, and the air thicker with the smell of roasting meats and caramelizing sugar. You've wandered into the night market, where the forbidden and the fascinating often collided. Here, the rules were a little looser, the cooks a little bolder, and the dishes often pushed the boundaries of what people thought food could be. You pass a vendor grilling skewers of something that looks suspiciously like tiny birds, heads and all. You stop to watch as he flips them expertly over glowing coals, brushing them with a glaze that sizzles on contact. He offers you one, and though you hesitate, the smell wins. The meat is crisp, smoky, and surprisingly delicate. The vendor explains that these small birds, sometimes sparrows or quails, were a delicacy but were restricted in certain regions because overhunting threatened local populations. Eating one might have been seen as a sign of wealth, or even a little rebellion. Next comes a stand selling deep-fried silkworm pupae. The smell is nutty and earthy, and the vendor pops one into his mouth with a grin to prove it's safe. You try one too, and it crunches, releasing a warm, savory flavor that reminds you of roasted chestnuts. Historians still argue whether these insects were more of a famine food or a true delicacy, but either way, they packed a protein punch that kept people fed when meat was scarce. Then there's the candy maker, pulling hot sugar into shining threads under the glow of his lantern. He shapes them into animals, dragons, phoenixes, monkeys, and hands them out to wide-eyed children. But he also sells candied fruits, hawthorn berries skewered and coated in glossy syrup, a treat so coveted that there were sometimes price controls to prevent poor families from spending too much on them. You bite into one and nearly laugh as the syrup crunches loudly in the quiet night air. A few stalls down, you catch a whiff of something savory and strong, roasted scorpions. Yes, scorpions. They're skewered, fried until crispy, and sprinkled with salt. The vendor hands you one, and you take a tentative bite. It's crunchy, nutty, almost like eating a shrimp shell, and surprisingly not bad. You can't help but think of modern reality shows where contestants squeal at the idea of eating bugs. Clearly, ancient snackers would have crushed those challenges. In the corner of the market is a steaming pot of blood tofu, made from pig's blood congealed into soft cubes and simmered with garlic and ginger. You take a small bite, and it's silky, rich, and slightly metallic. Some dynasties restricted the use of animal blood for food, claiming it was unclean or spiritually dangerous, which only made it more popular in places where people refused to give it up. Nearby, a spice vendor pounds Sichuan peppercorns with garlic and chili, creating a tongue-numbing paste. He grins and smears a little on a piece of bread for you. The numbing sensation makes you giggle, it's like your whole mouth just fell asleep. Spices like these were sometimes taxed heavily, so eating them could be seen as flaunting your access to luxury. Then there's the street doctor, crouched behind a table covered with jars of dried lizards, snakes, and roots. He's selling tonics, some liquid, some powdered, meant to boost stamina or cure mysterious ailments. You try a sip of one made from ginseng and deer antler. It's bitter, earthy, and makes your tongue tingle. Whether or not it works, you feel a strange sense of vitality wash over you. The market hums with energy, the smell of food and smoke mixing with laughter and bargaining. And yet, you can feel a faint undercurrent of danger. These were the kinds of places where officials might raid stalls to confiscate illegal ingredients or shut down immoral delicacies. Some vendors had secret recipes passed down only within their families, guarded like treasure. When you finally step out of the market, the sounds fade behind you, replaced by the soft chirp of crickets. Your hands still smell faintly of spices and sugar, and your stomach is happily full but buzzing with the memory of flavors that blurred the line between forbidden and celebrated. You glance back once, half expecting to see the lanterns wink out all at once, as if the market were never really there. The night feels cooler now, calmer, as though the markets have burned off the last of your restless energy. The path leads you to a quiet courtyard, where moonlight pools on polished stone. At first, it seems empty, until you notice the rows of scrolls stored in bamboo tubes, stacked carefully in wooden shelves. You've arrived at the archives, where recipes that were too dangerous, too powerful, or too strange for everyday use were recorded and hidden away. You kneel beside a table as a scholar in simple robes unfurls a scroll. The ink is faded, but the illustrations leap off the page, sketches of strange fruits, animals, and dishes you've never seen before. The scholar explains that these were taboo foods, documented so future generations would remember not to eat them, or, occasionally, to know exactly how to prepare them for rare ritual use. The first scroll describes a dish of bear paw, a delicacy reserved strictly for emperors. It was said to be braised for hours in wine and spices until meltingly tender. Eating it without imperial permission could be punished by death, not only because of its rarity but because it symbolized bravery and strength, virtues reserved for the throne. Historians still argue whether this ban was about conservation, symbolism, or simply keeping peasants from eating the best cuts. Another scroll lists pufferfish, which even then was recognized as dangerous. The notes detail exactly how to cut away the poisonous organs before cooking. One careless slip, and the meal could be your last. You shiver, realizing that the difference between a luxurious feast and a fatal mistake might have been just a few millimeters of knife work. Then there's a recipe for something that makes you blink twice, a medicinal stew made from the meat of leopards, believed to treat certain illnesses. This was strictly forbidden to anyone outside the royal court, both because of the rarity of the animal and its connection to military power. You can't help but wonder if the people who ate it felt stronger, or simply more hunted. Another scroll warns against eating river crabs during certain months, when they were said to be poisonous due to seasonal heat. You imagine whole villages whispering to each other, nervously avoiding their favorite dish until the right time of year, when the crabs were safe again. Food safety was often cloaked in spiritual language, but at its heart, it was survival science disguised as ritual. The scholar shows you a final, more mysterious scroll, its writing so poetic you almost can't tell if it's a recipe or a riddle. It describes a dish of moonlit mushrooms that should only be gathered at midnight under the full moon, boiled 3 times, and served with ginger. Was it medicine? A spiritual offering? Or simply an excuse to have an eerie midnight picnic? No one knows, and the scholar smiles as if to say, some secrets are better left unsolved. You roll up the scroll carefully, feeling as though you're holding a piece of living history. These recipes weren't just about taste, they were about power, danger, and respect for the natural world. Some were warnings, some were flexes of imperial authority, and some were whispered secrets passed down like treasure maps. Before you leave, the scholar hands you a small slip of paper with a single character written on it, meaning forbidden. You tuck it into your sleeve as a reminder that food has always been more than sustenance, it can be law, faith, and even life or death decision-making. As you step back into the courtyard, the moonlight seems brighter, throwing long shadows across the stones. You feel lighter, too, as though the weight of those scrolls has passed through you and left you with a quiet respect for everything you've tasted tonight. Somewhere beyond this courtyard, the final chapter of your journey waits, one last forbidden feast before the night ends. The courtyard leads you down a final, narrow corridor lit by flickering oil lamps. The smell of incense grows stronger, and your steps echo softly against the stone floor. At the end, a heavy wooden door stands slightly ajar. You push it open and find yourself inside a grand hall. It is silent except for the faint crackle of a fire, and in the center sits a single, long banquet table laid with dishes you've never seen before. This is the last stop on your journey, the Forbidden Feast. Each plate seems to glow in the firelight, inviting and intimidating at once. You take a seat at the table, half expecting a stern imperial chef to appear and scold you, but no one comes. The first dish is a bowl of soup so clear it reflects the fire like a mirror. The aroma is delicate, earthy, and slightly sweet. It is made from deer sinew, long simmered until it melts into gelatin. This dish was reserved for the highest-ranking guests and sometimes banned during times of war, since deer were crucial for supplying hides and sinews for bows. Next is a platter of roasted peacock. The bird's shimmering tail feathers fan out behind it like a crown, a reminder of why this dish was usually reserved for court banquets and strictly forbidden to commoners. The meat is gamey and tender, and as you taste it, you can almost imagine a hall full of ministers nodding solemnly as they dined on something this rare. Historians still argue whether peacock was more about the taste or the display. It might have been little more than edible theater. There's a small dish of fermented tofu, so strong it makes your nose wrinkle before you even taste it. The flavor is sharp, cheesy, almost too powerful, and yet, strangely addictive. This kind of tofu was sometimes banned in temples because its smell was thought to distract monks from meditation. You take another bite and chuckle softly, distraction might be an understatement. Toward the end of the table sits a plate of 5 poisons, dumplings, a special festival dish stuffed with ingredients symbolic of scorpions, snakes, toads, centipedes, and spiders, sometimes real, sometimes just represented with herbs. They were meant to drive away evil spirits but were avoided by many who feared tempting fate. You bite into one and taste a mix of sharp herbs and peppery heat, as if the dumpling is daring you to keep chewing. Finally, there's dessert, glistening candied lotus seeds arranged in perfect patterns, each one meant to symbolize purity and fertility. Ironically, this dessert was sometimes forbidden to young novices in monasteries, who were expected to avoid temptations of sweetness. You pop one in your mouth anyway, letting it dissolve slowly on your tongue. When you've tasted everything, you sit back in the quiet hall. The fire is burning lower now, and you can feel your eyelids grow heavy. The dishes on the table seem to glow a little softer, as if they're fading into memory. You stand, bow to the feast, and turn toward the door. As you step outside, the night air is cool and still. The moon is high, and the world feels hushed, as though it's waiting for you to take the last few steps of the journey home. You walk slowly, savoring the feeling of having tasted things most people never will, having crossed the thin line between forbidden and celebrated. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows, reminding you that dawn isn't far away. And now, with your stomach full and your curiosity satisfied, it's time to let the night close in. You take a deep breath and feel the cool air fill your lungs. The path behind you feels longer now, as if you've walked not just through streets and markets but through centuries of history. Every dish you've tasted lingers like faint music, each flavor another brushstroke on the canvas of a long-lost world. The lamps along the road grow fewer, their glow dimmer, and soon it's just you and the moon, walking together in quiet rhythm. Your footsteps slow until you're barely moving, letting the night stretch out as long as it can. The memory of the forbidden feast feels softer now, like an old story someone once whispered in a warm room. You notice the crickets again, their sound steady and reassuring. The air smells faintly of smoke and sweet incense, and somewhere far away you think you can still hear laughter from the night market. It's distant enough now to sound like a dream. Your shoulders relax, your breath evens out, and the last edges of excitement smooth into calm. The ground beneath your feet feels steady, safe, and familiar, as if it's leading you gently back to where you started. Before you reach the end of the road, you stop and take one last look over your shoulder, just to be sure the world you visited is still there. It is, quiet, waiting, glowing faintly under the moonlight. You smile, feeling lucky to have wandered so far and tasted so much. Now let the night take over. Close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and let yourself drift, warm and full, into a well-earned rest.